section in the chat. So we will go to them at the end of the presentation or the panel discussions. So whenever you have a question, please just write this down, and Oscar will note it down and then ask them in the end. So. But maybe we can also take a moment and introduce ourselves on the chat. So just say your name and what your position is. Hello, Minko.
Hello.
We're about to start. And let's give maybe a minute or two before everyone is joining. Yes, it will be published if gods of presentation are on our side. But okay, not to prolong it even further, maybe let's start. So a warm welcome to Minko Gechev, who's right now in San Francisco, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe I can introduce myself real quick. My name is Greg. I'm CTO in Kobiro. I have been working in Angular for many years now. And we decided that we organize the meetups. As you can see, every month there is a new meetup coming up. So we try to build this community of people who want to be a craftsman in Angular specifically. So we have a couple of questions, but maybe first let's Minko, I mean, everyone knows you, but maybe you can introduce yourself real quick. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Minko Gechev. I've been working in the Angular team at Google for close to 2.5 years now. Before that, I was building startups for a while, for 7 years maybe or more. And my most recent startup was acquired by Coursera in 2019. It was an educational application that I was really excited on building. And yeah, currently I'm working in developer relations. So I'm talking to a lot of different customers of Angular, a lot of different enterprises and enterprise products, both inside of Google and outside of the company. And yeah, it has been fantastic to meet many folks excited about the framework and brainstorm different solutions for challenges that they're facing.
Sounds great. Maybe can you tell us a little bit more, like how did you actually get to the Angular team? Is there some sort of like official process, or you're just well known? What were the steps? Like how did you get there?
I started contributing to AngularJS in 2012, I think, or 2013, and I started building a lot of libraries around it and started like blogging about the framework. I was pretty excited about the technology in general. Started doing research on, let's say, the design patterns used in Angular and published a series of articles about it, published the Angular style guide. And this continued while I was building products and like startups in the meantime. This was kind of my hobby to build open source and write about it. So that's how I got to build one of the tools that we use for static analysis for Angular Colorizer. It was around the Angular style guide. Once we developed it together with, it was a joint effort between Microsoft back then, it was Google, and myself, I was back in Bulgaria at this time. And I was thinking how I can make the process of following the style guide a little bit more automated. So developed a bunch of rules on top of Tslint and also built on top of Tslint to allow template linting. So yeah, that's how I got to know the team better. They introduced this tool as part of their official tooling, Angular CLI, and it ended up being widely used in Google also. So we just deprecated Collizer in favor of the implementation on top of Eslint, I believe in version 10. And in the meantime, I continued working on other stuff like tools for predictive prefetching, reverse engineering of apps, just things that I've been building in my spare time. And yeah, I went through the interview process after the team wanted to hire me, and ended up working on Angular full-time.
That's great. Okay, so today's talk is about TODO app and enterprise level apps. It's because a lot of tutorials online are really about to do, just get it done without any levels of abstractions, with a very small code base, something that you can pretty much code in one component, maybe one module. So you work in Google and on different various projects, so you definitely worked on a lot of big projects. So can you tell us, like, what is the biggest project that you worked on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, I'm currently working on development infrastructure. So all I do is I'm building just tools for developers and talking to developers. So Angular, like the framework, is kind of the project that I'm working on right now. It's not as huge actually. It's a couple of hundreds of lines, a couple of hundreds of thousands of lines of code. And before that, it was something similar. On Rhyme.com, the company I worked on, our front end was, let's say, 200-300 of thousands of lines of codes. The backend was a few tens of thousands, so way smaller. However, in the meantime, I had to collaborate with a lot of different products within Google. For example, probably the biggest application in there is Google Cloud Console, which is, I believe, over 2 million lines of TypeScript right now. That's only the front end. Google Analytics is pretty massive as well. So we had the opportunity to just collaborate with this team and see what problems are they facing, what challenges they have, and how do they approach in solving them. And that's not only within Google. This has been also an ongoing thing outside of Google. We have been talking to large customers. Many of them I probably will not be able to explicitly mention, but let's say, for example, with Allianz, with Deutsche Bank, and many others, just brainstorming different solutions for helping them scale.
Mm-hmm. That sounds exciting. I mean, 200,000 lines of code, that's already quite big. And then you talk sometimes millions. This is crazy. Like, how many libraries is that? I mean, I believe it's not all in one file, right? I mean, of course, it doesn't make any sense.
It's, I don't remember, maybe about 30,000, I'm not sure. Okay. We had, for my products, it was way like a couple of hundreds of that's the front end of Rhyme, which is like 200,000-300,000 lines of code.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so maybe let's talk about organizing this whole, massive code base. So, like we in Kobiro, we use NX monorepo. We try to organize things. It's a new thing, so we migrate to NX monorepo right now. And then, like they recommend some sort of libraries. You might have some shared libraries, maybe some core libraries, utilities, feature libraries, of course. So, what is your take on like monorepo versus multi-repo? Maybe like what is your preferred way and why?
Yeah. It's interesting to dig a little bit behind the motivation of this also. So I'm not an NX expert. I haven't been using NX much. I have been talking to a lot of people who have been using NX, and I have been talking a lot to Gechev and Victor, who developed NX. So I might not be completely familiar with all the terminology that they have in their tooling. Generally, multi-repo versus monorepo. I generally prefer the monorepo approach, but I've been also kind of spoiled from within Google. We have one pretty large monorepo with a couple of probably in size, it has a couple of billions of lines of codes, for sure, at least. We are keeping everything within this monorepo, and I'll say the distinguishment between the separation between library and application there is not as huge, and there is still some separation. There are different BASO rules, or like different build rules for libraries and applications, but generally under the hood they're not treated that much differently, and that's mostly because of some features of our tooling that we're using. In particular to NX, I believe that very frequently this separation is encouraged between libraries and applications so that you can apply more aggressive caching and your build can scale over time way better. You can, and also code reusability, of course, so that you can extract separate features of your application that are potentially shareable across multiple applications, so that you can build them separately, you don't have to rebuild them every time, and you can reuse them multiple times, multiple places. So with monorepos, what I particularly like, I like quite a few things actually there. Sharing infrastructure is probably the biggest thing, because you need to set up CI only once, and that's pretty convenient. You don't have to set up CI multiple times, and when you change something, go in all your CIs and update it. It's very easy to enforce common coding style, which is great. It creates like fewer conflicts about syntax, and this could be annoying during code reviews. I really like the fact that it could set some constraints on technologies, because everyone has their own technological preferences, clearly. Like many people prefer to use type systems, so they're going to go with TypeScript. Others prefer more dynamic approach, so they're going to go with just like plain JavaScript. And both parties can have solid arguments for what is better in certain cases than the other. So just deciding on a common set of technologies and sticking to it has been really powerful, at least in Google, because imagine having billions of lines of codes and everyone using their own like favorite programming language, using let's say like Haskell and IO and Go and C# and many other languages out there. This could get very messy. So we have decided on a specific set of programming languages that you can use in this monorepo, and they're all well supported. As everything outside of that, you're not guaranteed to be able to use it in the long run. And enforcing this with a monorepo is way easier compared to having hundreds of different repositories in different parts of your organization, where you can use anything you want to, and when you leave and someone else needs to maintain it, it gets messy. So yeah, I mentioned how easy it is to set up CI once, also consistency across the projects. What I also really like is the communication, because you can see the entire code in the organization this way. And it's very convenient to reuse code. Yeah, you see other libraries used in other parts of your projects or your company. You can very easily reuse them and find even opportunities to build shared abstractions that could be reused across the board. So in terms of communication, this is really helpful as well.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially with the polyglot approach, like if you let developers code whatever they want, I mean, how do you even change developer from one project to another, Now, today you code in Node.js, tomorrow in Python, because someone decided that. I mean, yeah, that can be a mess as well. Okay, yeah. But when we talk about the shared libraries, right? So you have some sort of a shared, let's say a UI, like Angular material, right? Let's say like this. So what kind of other libraries than UI would you consider being shareable across all the stuff? Because we don't want to have a spaghetti code and local cohesion when modules call one another. It needs to have some sort of a structure. So what is your best guess on that?
Yeah, I guess the UI libraries are the most obvious scenario. I guess this also depends on specifics of the application. Often you can extract different like shared algorithms that you could reuse again across different applications, or even part of your domain logic. Why not? If you're working on enormous projects and you have some shared business rules, it makes sense to implement them only once. For example, if you're working for a large bank and in this large bank you have shared processes, so you can implement these processes as some kind of business libraries, and you can even wrap them in UI libraries, so you can have business components. This is how some banks have been calling these abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the application, there could be different things. I guess we can very highly categorize them to UI libraries and non-UI
totally.
libraries.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, also, like when I think about Angular material, I think it's a great tool, and it shows like the way how it should be coded, the presentation logic, with all the directives and all change detection, and this should be running out of ngZone. I have a feeling like people don't really read that. I don't feel like the first thing I tell my developer is like, why do you make your own presentation component? Why don't you go to Angular material and just use it? One of the common arguments I get all the time, which is a bit silly, is because it's hard to style. What's your take on that?
We should write better documentation on theming. That's probably one of it. Yeah, we started working. That's actually a kind of a gap that we noticed that we have. So we are definitely going to write more documentation on theming and styling, and we have a couple of videos on the topic currently on the pipeline. So that's something that we're going to improve on our site. And I would say that's mostly Angular's fault. Okay. We should do a better job. We also have this Ngdp thing, which we deprecated some time back because of changes in the V0 spec of web components. And there is no replacement right now. So Ngdp is the way to go. And that's what this has been bad communication on our side, something we can improve.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, don't be so harsh. I mean, clean code is the one that doesn't need documentation, right? You can just, clearly read it and understand it from the get-go. I think it's also a bit on the people being slightly lazy and like, I want to have something that just works, and is custom to my needs out of the box.
Oh yeah, that's on the other side too. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, clearly there are such requirements. And often it's like fun to build things, right? So why would I use this library when like building my model dialog is just like 200 lines of code?
Yeah. I mean, it's my lines of code, right? I mean, IKEA effect. I build it is the best, of course.
Yeah, yeah. This has been I would definitely recommend people to like not do that though. We spent a lot of time in making sure that all the components are very accessible. We're even investing with 2 new people who will be joining the team just to make sure that just to work on accessibility. And just making something accessible is usually not trivial. Also making sure it's performance, and folks on the Angular material team, they know the Angular framework pretty well. So they will be probably able to do a good job with making sure that everything is well optimized and integrated well with the framework. So yeah, generally I would not recommend building something from scratch when it's already available. But at the same time, we can do a better job with documenting theming. So that was my self-critic.
Okay, but when we talk about the libraries, you have like hundreds of libraries, thousands of libraries, like a big enterprise kind of level application, or applications really in a monorepo. Then where is the boundary of the module? Because a typical case I see with the developers is like, hey, I have my library that's small enough and I don't make any more modules, right? But technically you could, right? You could just reuse it, extend it, export it. What's the take? How small should a module be?
Yeah, that's also like depends on application per application and case by case scenario. I guess we can discuss common pitfalls and from there maybe extract some general rules. I would say just generally library shouldn't have a huge API surface. I guess a couple of rules are probably a library shouldn't have a huge API surface. But this doesn't mean that it doesn't have to have any complexity. It just could be abstracted with different states. So not having huge API surface and having everything on a similar level of abstraction, I guess this would be the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
By a similar level of abstraction, I mean, for example, if we were distributing Angular framework and Angular material under the same package, that was going to be wrong, because Angular framework provides very primitives for building components, and Angular material provides components. So they're just on different levels of abstraction. Also, making sure that your API surface is not enormous. That's something that is important, but at the same time, you can build, if you need higher level libraries, you can very easily compose multiple libraries and build them under certain abstract interfaces that these abstract interfaces are providing a facade for the communication between your sub-libraries. Like having a number on like how small is too small or how big is too big, it's hard to guess, but often even having some artificial constraints might not be such a horrible idea. If you have looked at, there are different, like in academia, they love to do research and try to set quality metrics on a software, which I haven't seen really well adopted in the industry though. But for example, something like cyclomatic complexity, where you're measuring the different conditional and different constructs within a function, this sometimes is kind of an all right metric, so why not sometimes, I guess. You just set a hard constraint on how many public classes a certain library could extend. This could export. This might not be a horrible idea all the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, now we're moving more towards the maintenance of that code base, right? So you have a huge code base, and how do you actually keep track? Because you can imagine it can be quite a challenge if you have like centralized decision-making process. That's not going to work at all. So you have to decentralize it. So then the teams have to make decisions, but then you have a problem with reusability, that you have to make sure that that team is not reinventing the wheel what the other team already did. So it's so cyclomatic complexity is one of my favorite metrics to actually look over and have some sort of like threshold being put on it. But on the other hand, sometimes developers come and say, it's like, I missed this one complexity here. Can we maybe raise it a little bit? Because it's just convenient for me and I have to push that feature. So it's pretty funny. Where's the threshold as well, right? And then that's also my point. Would you mentioned a little bit about like Eslint, like sort of like having a one place for configuration of all monorepo, but would you also be interested in like making some exceptions per module, per library, per app, or would you say no, one standard for all, but keep it simple?
So in Google, we have a single tsconfig file for all the projects, and we have enabled strict type checking for all of them. We have a single tslint.json file, and that's probably not going to change. There are some exceptions though, so you can see that some people have added rules suppressions as comments in certain scenarios, and that's mostly because linting sometimes it's not 100% accurate, so it's not complete. It's not how would you call that? Yeah, it's not complete, I would say. Sometimes it returns false positives. But generally sticking to the same configuration and not making exceptions, having someone to own this configuration is important, because otherwise everyone being very democratic here can fire back. In TypeScript, in Google, we have only one team that owns the TypeScript compiler, and if you want to change a flag, you need to go through them, and they have thousands of developers who want to change flags, so they don't let them. It can get messy.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, single one. You talk about the complexity. How about some other metrics? I don't know, maybe churns or lines of code or coupling. Like, do you merge that as well?
I was interested in just academical research on these topics. I've never seen I've seen all the different different kinds of coupling. I've never seen that measured in a real app actually.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a team in Google that just goes through the monorepo and tries different tools for static analysis and tries to find correlation between different metrics. And sometimes they come up with interesting results. Actually, I think something they published recently. Something actually which might have been related to coupling. I read it like 2 months ago. Yeah, on a day-to-day basis, though, I haven't seen that being frequently enforced.
We talk a lot about like maintainability, right? Because for now, on one side, when you start up, you want to like build it fast, get it to the market. Eventually, you get this market fit, and then okay, now we have to stabilize the whole code base. So now you have a lot of code base that has been built very fast. So you want to measure things like maintainability. Do you think there is a sure way of measuring that? We, for example, use Code Climate, and it shows us some sort of artificial grading like A, B, C, D, or whatever it is. Do you think we can measure maintainability, or it's really hard to measure? Like duplication of code, maybe, or I don't know.
Tell me more about how you get the grades. Is it through like some static analysis, or how often you touch particular parts of your code base?
Yeah, it's pretty much it measures cyclomatic complexity. So how complex is a classes, the lines of code per class, per function. And then it also measures things like duplication of code, really, but yeah. It's sometimes silly because it thinks a constructor is a duplication of code, which not necessarily is the case.
Yeah, and sometimes, there is someone from the Ruby community, I think, published a quote sometime back, maybe 10 years ago, that code duplication is cheaper than wrong abstraction, and this. I love this. That's my favorite software engineering quote ever.
Yeah.
Because I just see how people like extending classes and inheritance and stuff, and it can cause trouble in the long run.
Yeah, makes sense. But also like extension and like composition over inheritance. One of the rules, I guess, in Angular, maybe you can tell a little bit about this. Like people like to extend. You extend, but you can extend only one class at a time, right? Where you can actually compose it. So maybe your thoughts on composition.
Yeah. It has been. Yeah, generally we don't recommend using inheritance when, well, let's say if there is another way to do that, maybe inheritance is not the right way to go, especially with components. You can definitely use inheritance there. You can add directive decorator to your base class and inherit it afterwards. Generally, though, inheritance creates very strong coupling between both components. And sometimes the relationship doesn't make too much sense when we continue extending these classes. We kind of start treating a particular base class as a mix-in more rather than a is-a relationship where where it like logically makes sense to have this inheritance construct. So generally, I would recommend using just composition, just creating decorating particular classes, just using the decorator design pattern pretty much there, just creating the class and wrapping it around custom functionality that you would want to enhance it with.
Mm-hmm. Plus, Angular has a great dependency injection system, so you can easily like just inject things in the constructor. So, of course, okay. I have some questions also from the audience here that we prepared beforehand, and it reads: as a developer, what checklist do you follow, if any, that we could follow too, to ensure that your Angular apps are truly enterprise ready? Is a high Lighthouse score sufficient to give this confidence? Anything else you personally do?
Yeah, Lighthouse is important, especially if you're building. I guess this depends on the project goals. If you're building a public-facing application where the SEO ranking is important, I would recommend making sure that your Lighthouse score looks good. If you're building something that people are going to consume only within your enterprise network, or only within your organization when they're in the office or working from home with Ethernet connection, probably doesn't make sense to spend that much time in over optimizing the load time. Like if they're going to have very fast network connection, whether the application is going to open in 100 milliseconds or 110 milliseconds doesn't make too much of a difference. in terms of accessibility, it's similar, although we definitely want to make sure that Angular applications are following best accessibility practices out of the box. And in enterprises, this is essential. Yeah, actually, accessibility is something that I would invest more on compared to performance in certain cases, especially when building enterprise applications that are not necessarily public-facing. And I don't have a checklist. Yeah.
Okay, no checklist, guys. That would be too easy. No, I'm joking. But I mean, sometimes it can be behind the login, like it could be like some back office panel or something like this. And then, hey, why would you care about SEO optimization if you pretty much like only your own users are using it, right? Exactly what you said. Okay, do you have any, people like this top 3, top 5 kind of solution remedies for all problems, which technically don't exist, but let me give it a go. What are the 3 things to keep a large-scale code base healthy? From all the metrics, all the stuff we discuss, what would you consider like the most important?
Oh, there is a great book, which probably you have heard about, the Pragmatic Programmer. So they're talking about the broken window technique there, not the broken window technique, but the broken window problem, or what was it called? And the boiling frog. So the moment when you, just like constant refactoring, that's the thing that I would recommend. Just constant refactoring, looking through the code base and seeing where you can improve stuff and whether you can extract functionality in common abstractions and whether this makes sense. Just like, constant refactoring, and this would be, and if you see that something starts regressing, just catching it on time. All right, so these are 2 things. Let's see about the third one. I mean, you need to have good test coverage.
Oh, okay, that's a good one. We actually really into test coverage. We say in Kobiro that we have like 140, 150% of test coverage. It's because we tested end-to-end and we tested with, all the types of testing. Once it could be unit testing, the other could be acceptance testing. So we're really into the test coverage. So that's also like, testing done wrong can harm your projects, because it can cause this extra maintenance. Because, we use TDD, so we try to write the code first. The test first, then we code, and then we refactor. So we complete that cycles. But on the other hand, how can we organize code around maintainability as well? I'm talking about test code. How can we improve our test code? Because very often it's like something that you just have to do, and not necessarily something you want. So, but I think you should get some love as well as a production code.
Yeah, well, I guess the 2 biggest things that I have noticed were as challenges in like all the projects. These are like not specific, just super generic, where you keep your tests, whether they're next to the code or in a separate directory. So my recommendation there would be to keep them close to the code. It's just easier to navigate and change. And the second is, so tests sometimes, when you make a change, you need to change. When you make a change in your code, you need to change also the tests, and this sometimes could be very breaking and can require a lot of maintenance of the test as well. So some patterns such as test harnesses and page object are often convenient to use, so that you don't couple your tests to implementation details which are not necessarily relevant for the test case. In Angular material, that is why we started shipping test harnesses over the past 2 releases, which allow you to interact with the component through some kind of an interface which is very user-focused. So if you would want to test, if you would want to press a button, you wouldn't have to use query documents. Query selector button. You can just like get the button and call a method click rather than coupling to the page structure and selectors and so on and so forth.
Oh, okay. So no more selectors. We actually extended that, platform by where we go by CSS or by directive. We actually created something called by.data selector because, we tried to put the data selectors instead of all IDs or query by
Mhm.
CSS and stuff like this. But you say that maybe we should look into the Angular material and see how it should be done, actually.
We export some primitives so you can build test harnesses yourself if you would want to, if it makes sense.
Mhm.
They're like page objects. Just you can create an instance of a particular harness and interact with the component through it, and it has some bindings to WebDriver and to Cypress, so that it can just interact with the components through the APIs that are available by the test platform.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because whenever I browse code bases like this, I can see that we have sort of an end-to-end approach to testing UI components, right? So that's sort of what you're talking. Like you could use Cypress end-to-end testing. Why not to just test it like with Karma and Jasmine?
Actually, that's for scenarios when Karma and Jasmine allows that. That's what I would recommend. I like the UI features, the visual features of Cypress. Feels nice.
Yeah.
If you have noticed our RFC to make the e2e command a little bit more generic, and we have been actually working with WebDriver IO and Cypress to make sure these two tools have smooth integrations with the CLI and allow developers to use them.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, but that's about testing. Maybe. Oh, I have actually one more question about testing. Like, there is a stigma around code coverage, right? Do you think, like, of course, it's just some sort of a metric. It doesn't, like, you can test because the test just flows through your program. It doesn't mean you actually test really the things.
Yeah.
But what do you think about the code coverage? Is that important, or what percentage is good enough? Do you even look at that?
I guess for some parts of the system, I do. Like generally, 100, as you said, like 100% coverage doesn't mean much. There still might be issues in the program. You might have just like passed through a different code path. So I guess it's important. I mean, it's an important health metric, as we discussed the health metrics. If you have like 0% test coverage, that's probably not good. Or if it's like under like 60-70% for some parts, it's still probably not ideal. But I wouldn't be always chasing 100% test coverage, if this makes sense. Yeah, I guess I would more rely on code reviews to make sure that my peers recognize important test cases which I have missed, rather than just relying on test coverage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there is a logic behind it, which, code coverage will not come up. Even if you have good acceptance tests with given, when, then, or whatever business cases, I mean, it still can be flawed, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of which, pull request reviews, right? So when I look through pull reviews, and I do it quite a lot, and then I'm thinking like, gosh, wouldn't that be a machine who would do that for me already? I mean, I believe the attempts have failed many companies already. What is your take? Do you think Linter can sort of automate that process or any other tool, or there will always be a need for pull review, even in the big companies?
We have a bunch of linters, and we have a bunch of static code tools for static code analysis. I mean, we have many. I've never seen that many tools for static code analysis. Yeah, Google has been definitely trying to go there, but for code style, definitely a code formatter is going to fix things, going to figure things out even before you have to open a pull request. Linters help with some other checks. For example, even it depends on the definition. Yeah, it actually is very interesting. It gets very blurry at a certain point because we have often linters try to enforce coding style, and that's probably not we should be probably not using linters for this, because we have code formatters, and if the code formatter can if there is something you can fix, probably you shouldn't be throwing a linting error about it. You should be probably fixing it automatically. So code formatters are for code formatting, clearly, for code style. Linters, so this part of the review shouldn't be relevant at all. Like, nobody should be looking at coding style in 99.9% of the cases, because the code formatter everyone should stick just to the defaults, even if they don't like it. That's at least my opinion, though. With linters, they go one step further, so sometimes they can even have false positives. Many linters have level of confidence for the individual lint checks, but they could be checking something slightly more complicated things. For example, early returns. If you like early returns, your linter can enforce that. And this is not a coding style thing. Or finding unused variables, that's still not a coding style thing. And this unused variable might be there for a reason. It might be producing some side effect, I guess. I don't know. Maybe in some languages. Yeah, actually, it's possible. I guess for accessors, it might be possible. And there are the security tools for performing security analysis, which could be still static and dynamic. And sometimes people merge all these things into just linting, which might be fine. I'm just very strongly against having code formatting as part of linting. And yeah, that's what linting can fix, like static analysis can fix. But there is also the business logic verification, and the tools for static analysis, they can't have enough context and understanding of the domain so that they can give hints about that. So yeah, that's where I guess the code review comes in.
Yeah, makes sense. I don't think it will be ever like automated. Maybe in some layers, though. Maybe in some, as you say, maybe in the service, maybe you have too much things in the service, so don't do it or something. But of course, it's just sort of like a light, showing, hey, maybe you should look here, other than actually, like saying this is wrong or this is correct. I have another question actually about the CSS. CSS, we are front-end developers, we build beautiful designs, and how do we manage CSS in a large code base? Because there is this debate about, should you use view encapsulation? Should you use utility classes? Should you use BEM? Like, what's the take on that? How to manage that? Should we have one centralized style and not have a component styles at all? Or how do you think about it?
I have been successful with Yanger's view encapsulation. And I have been successful. So I've been building React applications in the past also. And I've been successful with BEM or like CSS modules which were inspired, which I got inspired for using based on the view encapsulation and in Angular. I definitely think that some level of view encapsulation is worth it, because I've had far too many cases when styles were applied in pages where they weren't supposed to be. Yeah, a colleague of mine, Jeremy, who is working on Angular material, he's currently leading the components team and framework. He has strong opinions about view encapsulation, where it's like a thing which you eventually need to disable in some cases in order to style components deeper into the component tree. So it's not a solution for 100% of the cases, but I'll say it is good enough for development of applications in most cases. And when we have to make an exception, we can be very explicit about it. When we need to disable it, or when we need to style something deeper with ngdeep, or
makes sense.
This would be why. That's my opinion about it.
But actually, like, how do we approach the problem with the CSS variables? Because, we have this designer, for example, who has built this, design system, right? So he says, these are the colors we have to follow. These are the fonts we have to follow. So would you still be up for having a CSS variables in a centralized place, or you would just copy it over, or how to do it?
I guess in such case, it makes sense to have a centralized place when it is just a predefined set of colors that are shared across all the applications, and they're related to theming. And it's not supposed to be super customizable because they're going to still set some constraints. So centralized probably makes sense.
But the theming is actually one way of centralizing it in some way, right? So you just use themes like in Angular material and then, just import it. That's one way. Yeah. Okay, what is your take on documentation? I mean, like I personally don't write documentation, but people talk bad about it. Like, Greg, you should do it. You're not the only developer here. So what do you think? Like, should we document it? How do we approach it?
My Google Home. Maybe we mentioned Google or something. My Google Assistant started talking. Just a second. Right. Yeah. Documentation. I don't like writing it either. We have to write a lot of API documentation in Angular. Do you mean documentation in terms of?
In terms of fellow colleagues, like people who will actually extend your code, not the people who will use it because it's open source. I'm talking more like in the company.
For example, component libraries, so that you can document their public interfaces, so that your colleagues know how to use them, and adding documentation comments to understand. Like self-documentation. These are still kind of subjective things. Sometimes unnecessary comments are just annoying when you document that you're assigning a variable or something like that, and you have to maintain then the tests, the code, and the documentation, which is far from ideal. In some cases, it makes more sense when you have to explain why you're doing something. Let's say importing a file with a polyfill. It's probably worth it mentioning why you're doing that, because someone can go there and delete it, and from there, if the test coverage suffers and you don't have cross-browser testing, let's say the code may just stop working for 5% of the users. I guess it depends on case-by-case basis. And Google, we have interesting posters in the bathroom. So when you go to the bathroom, you see they're called testing on the toilet. And I think they're public. You can find them in the Google testing book. They often have tips and tricks about documentation. Actually, they're about code, just like writing comments, right? And kind of subjective, kind of like case by case basis.
Okay, but maybe let's talk a little bit more about architecture as well, because we try to organize our code in modules and libraries, and then we say, okay, that library, we have some set of architectures that you can choose from, or ideally start with the most basic one, like service and smart components and whatever not. But then, it slowly grows into bigger and more advanced architectures. So one of them, actually, topic that comes up quite often, aside of abstraction and application services, is really micro frontends. Like, should we use micro frontends or not? And so far, our take was no, because we only use Angular. But what's your take on this? Isn't this just a hype, or what do you think about micro frontends?
I've seen people use the concept micro frontends in different ways, and in some cases it makes sense, in others it doesn't, especially the latter definition. So some people refer to micro frontends as a way to use different frameworks in your application, and this allows you higher level of flexibility. Some people with Vue background, they will be able to come and write code in your Angular application in the framework that they're aware of. And although this may increase the velocity in the short term, in the long term, when these people leave the team, you have to learn Vue and start to figure out everything. And lots of this JavaScript is going to be unnecessary, because Angular and Vue, sometimes they're solving similar problems, let's say, and generally the argument for using both on the page is not very solid. Probably it should be one or the other, unless there is a legacy system which is using one of the technology and there is a ongoing migration or something. So this kind of micro frontend is not my favorite part of thing, and I don't. If you have a case when you should start using multiple technologies on the same page, there should be probably longer discussions to see whether you can prevent doing that, because just adds extra complexity. Although two frameworks need to communicate together now, and even with Angular and AngularJS, that's getting kind of tricky. Which are like even like making sure that they have common shared lifecycle and stuff. The other argument is around independent deployability. So when an organization starts to scale a lot, like they have many different teams and each team is working on a part of the application, then it makes sense to be able to build these different applications independently from one another. And building them independently from one another would also create extra flexibility if you're able to deploy them independently from one another. This way you don't have to synchronize your release cycles across the entire organization, and you can push changes faster with simpler processes. In this case, micro frontends make sense, but by micro frontend here, I don't mean having multiple frameworks necessary on your page. I mean having one framework which allows you to, which is one framework which for one application that is composed of multiple other smaller applications that can eventually still live independently from one another. So they could be developed independently from one another.
Yeah, and also as you mentioned, this communication is quite a big problem. How do you do that? I mean, it's quite often you can't, or use some post message, or you can, like, one implementation of micro front is like use iframe. I mean, like, iframes. It's like 2000s, right? I mean, I haven't been using iframes for a while.
Yeah,
it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But I have another call because we are front-end developers, and very often it's just a UI layer of like a API on top of it, right? So we just fetch things from the database. It could be even serverless, or it could be just some sort of API, and then we fetch it and then we just display it. And very often, you go to the interview process or something like this, and then people say, like, ask you algorithms questions, like they can ask you about the binary trees or whatever, or some sort of other design patterns and algorithms. And very often people say, why do you do that? You never do it in front end. What's the take on that?
So since I'm working on infrastructure, I kind of have to do that often. And I've had to do this in most of my jobs, actually, but I might have been also working on more specific projects. Maybe it's not applicable for everyone. I have found applications in my day-to-day life for sure. I've had to implement modified versions of binary search many times. I've had to traverse trees hundreds, like thousands of times. So it has been really useful for me, actually. Yeah. And on Angular, we have like a lot of stuff going on there. There are a lot of graph traversals and some a lot of bitwise operations. We have to implement some data structures from scratch in some cases because they do not exist in the browser. I find these questions to be maybe not applicable for all the companies out there. It depends also on the hiring process. But are we talking about the interview process in general, or whether algorithms make sense or not?
No, whether algorithm makes sense. It's just an example. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. I would say it's worth it investing in algorithms. Okay. Maybe not memorizing how exactly you should balance a red-black tree, but understanding the high level ideas for the basic algorithms, like for computer science 101, it makes sense just knowing how they work together. Understanding the merge operation, the merge part of merge sort is kind of important. I've had to merge sorted lists, and knowing how to do that has been valuable, rather than having n-square algorithm. I was able to do it in just like linear complexity, which is nice. Yeah, just understanding the ideas and knowing how to apply them in different cases makes sense.
But you also mentioned things that you might have worked on, some visualization tools or geolocation kind of data. Would you consider that also like super important to know the algorithms?
Sure, yeah, geolocation. Yeah, you definitely need to have a lot of like multi-dimensional like indices there, like quad trees and KD trees, and yeah. But I mean, if you understand the basics of data structures, you can very easily dig into a more advanced patterns. If you have to, you can see bitmap indices, and they're going to kind of make sense if you're familiar with Bloom filters, and it can get more natural from there. Just like passing certain thresholds.
Yeah, I mean, and also like computers get stronger and stronger, and even the mobile phones, and like with the move of TensorFlow.js and things like this, maybe a small AI would also like start to emerge soon. Actually, like, yeah, that's a long topic. But I have also a question about the future, because we're getting to the end of our conversation today, and I have some questions also from people, and one of it is, you already mentioned, future of Ngdeep. Are we gonna get rid of it eventually, or do we want to, or what's the future for it?
Yeah, there is. We're not going to get rid of it anytime soon.
Okay, so keep using Ngdeep, you'll be safe on that.
If you can, yeah, if you cannot use it, don't use it. But if you have to use it, don't feel guilty about it.
Okay, not a big deal. How about zone? There is a big thing going, go zoneless and whatnot. What do you think about Zone.js in the future?
Yeah, eventually in the future, we're going to make Zone.js optional, or allow you to have zoneless applications in a way easier way. Currently, so one of the concerns with Zone.js is that it doesn't work great with async await. So sometimes we cannot down level. Sometimes we need to down level async await to promises, which is not ideal, but it's like not a huge deal either. So that was one of the motivation for us to go zoneless, or allow zoneless application to be implemented in a more ergonomic way. And the other reason is that just not having zones allows people to have more fine-grained access to the change detection. But at the same time, many people just love to have zones out there, and because zones are taking care of change detection for you, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about like invoking change detection when your state changes. So zones are, let's say, how most people love them. Some people don't love them that much. And we're going to, so the steps forward that we're going to make first are to make sure that zones work with async await. We are going to do some like call transformations that schedule change detection when the time comes with async await, so that people don't have to think about it. And it's not going to add significant weights to an application at all. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. And in the future, we're going to explore how zoneless applications may eventually look like, with having something like change detector ref detect changes, but slightly different.
Okay, can't wait. I mean, you know, it removes all the boilerplate, right? Let's say you want to prototype something, and even though, yeah, as you mentioned on the beginning, sometimes the like performance, it can be taken differently, right? I mean, as long as you don't have memory leaks and take care of it, I mean, and it's an internal application inside the company, maybe not such a big deal after all. Okay, so my final question goes, before we get to the real quick Q&A, if anyone has question, please write this in the channel so that we know about it. But before that, what's the next gen of Angular? We've seen Angular.js, now we see Angular 11 and from 2 and so on. Is the next gen Angular 30, or is it the Angular the next gen kind of new release?
Yeah, we're going to continue evolving Angular gradually. Okay. And some of the bigger things that are going to happen around making Zone.js optional, we prototyped something many years ago, actually, 2019, I think, 2 years ago, with progressive hydration. This has been kind of an exciting effort, which some people are actually currently using. Progressive hydration is a way to ship to the client just like server-side rendered application without much JavaScript there, so that when people start interacting with the application, it fetches only the JavaScript that is needed to handle this interaction from the server. And this clearly brings very fast time to interactive. So first input delay, I guess, in Core Web Vitals terminology. Although first input delay, I mean, yeah, we can put it this way. And just continue improving the tooling and making Angular familiar but better every next release.
Yeah, it's also one of our values, like iterative perfection over just close yourself in a cave and make the next gen that might be painful to adapt by the people actually.
Yeah.
Okay, just a final one, guys. Do you have any more questions, or we sort of covered everything? Because I don't know, Minko, you probably have to run in 2 minutes, right?
Yeah. I'll have to leave in a bit. But yeah, if you have questions, we can chat for a few more minutes.
Okay, good. We have one question by Ireneusz, and he asks, Angular 12 will use Webpack 5. Does it mean that integrating microfrontends through module federation will be officially supported?
Not officially supported for now. We are exploring whether this makes sense to officially support at a certain point. Currently, I would recommend just experimenting with Manfred's plugin, Manfred Stairs plugin. Manfred he's an Angular GD who did a lot of research in this space and came up with a lot of tools actually that you can use today.
Do we have any more questions, guys? If you're typing, you might raise your hand, so we know. In the meantime, maybe real quick, how about design patterns? Do you have any favorite design patterns that you use?
I started writing blog post series. I mean, I was thinking of writing 3 blog posts. I think I have only 2 about design patterns in open source project that I've been using. I like them as a way to communicate with people and just learning about new ideas for sure. I like them. Just being exploring new ideas in such structured way can help you come up with other similar ideas and build on top of what you already know. I generally like patterns. So I like decorator. I like all the structural, behavioral, and creational patterns out there.
There is a next one saying, what is the status of typed forms?
Yeah, so next week on ngconf, we're going to talk about this. We definitely want to make forms typed, more typed. There is no way to do that without breaking many people. And we want to do it in a mindful way so that we don't cause a lot of pain in the ecosystem. And it requires a lot of planning. So this is something that we want to do. It is probably going to take some time and a couple of iterations until we get there. We don't have timeline just yet. And on ngconf, we're going to give more details. So you can either check the event out, or the talks are going to be online after the conference also, a few weeks or months after that.
Okay, awesome. Then we have another question by Anna. I would like to know what is the recommendation for stable and as much as possible error failure prone translations that can be merged by developer after small HTML changes. We use NGX-I18 and support with xlif merge, but experiencing errors which are not friendly for development process. And so if I understand correctly, it's about the future of internationalization in Angular.
And you're finding that we're throwing some, and this I'm not sure what NGX-I18 support is. This seems to be a third-party plugin, right?
I think it's NGX-I18 N, I guess. Yeah, it's a third-party plugin. So
I'm not familiar with this. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this, Ariana.
Yeah, and then sorry, Anna. Then we have Ravi asking about what is Angular CLI used for other than bundle and optimize application.
Yeah, you can use it for deployment testing, linting, code generation. I guess that's one of the biggest benefits it brings. You can use different generators, you can add libraries to your projects and integrate them automatically. And I guess most importantly, you can keep up to date with the Angular CLI. So you can run just ng run, ng update, and and keep up to date.
There is a suggestion by Natalie saying we should probably add the topic problems with Angular material components in Safari to documentation. We had a hard time. Yeah, we already said sorry for this.
Okay, I'll add this to. I'll let the material team know.
Right. Then we have another question saying, when is Angular moving from Tslin to Eslint, if any?
Yeah, it's already there. So the next generation of the linting support for Angular is Eslint. You can, let me send you a link. Angular Eslint here. So linting is not going to be the and there are also migration. There are also update steps. So you can follow the update steps here to move from Tslint to Eslint. Your configuration should be automatically migrated, and also all the suppressions that you have inside of your files, they should be automatically updated to Eslint suppressions also. We're not going to add Eslint as part of the CLI by default, but yeah, adding it to your project is just a matter of running two commands: ng-add Angular Eslint schematics, and also generation of your project configuration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I guess that will be it. We don't want to keep you for longer. I have only really a little bit of a soft skill question in the end, which is like, we have a lot of young guys. There is a theory that we duplicate the amount of developers every 5 years. So, that means 50% of people have 5 years of experience or less, right? So the question is, what do you think is the best advice, or what do you think makes of the best developer? Like, what are the common traits of a great developer? What is the single tip you could give to enhance the career of a young people?
Yeah, I always encourage people to invest into understanding fundamental concepts rather than particular technologies. So learning computer science would be more valuable in the long run than learning a front-end framework, let's say. When you understand the fundamental concepts, you'll be able to easier identify them in a particular framework, let's say in Angular, and you'll be able to start seeing how, oh, look at this. The componentry is actually just a composite design pattern. Oh, and that's the same pattern that I've seen in other frameworks out there. You'll be able to easily transfer your knowledge across the board and be efficient with no matter what technologies you're using.
All right, that's a great tip. So don't focus on frameworks, focus on actual fundamentals of computer science. Makes sense.
I mean, from there you can learn the frameworks easily.
Mm-hmm. All right, Minko, thank you very much for coming. It's been a really great 1 hour with you. I think everyone is super excited that we could get such a guest to our meetup. So thank you very much. And I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you around one day.
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much for having me. And it was great chatting with you. If you'd want to chat more on social media, so we can chat there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Okay, I gotta get going too. Thank you very much. See you guys. If you guys want anything, please join our meetup group. Probably you're already there. So let's have a small discussion afterwards where we can, ask maybe some more questions. If you ever need anything, I can always ask Minko in the meantime. So yeah, let's create this great community of people who actually, wanna go forward with their skills and be the best version of the programmer of themselves. So thank you all for coming. Without you, this meetup wouldn't make much sense. So thank you and have a nice day. Bye.